All right. Hello, everyone. I see that people are having some really good discussions already in the audience here, and I think that's all in good spirits of a BoF. I'm happy to see that we have almost a half full room here. So this could be a very good and productive discussion on an important topic to me and also to the rest of the organizers of this session. You will be able to access the slides and everything through the DOI here. It should also be distributed through the normal collaborative notes and Whova platform and everything like that. So you could be able to get back to this. And I don't seem to be able to progress the slides using the clicker. So next slide, if I can ask for that. Yeah, it's the other green one. The big green one. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah. So it's me, not the clicker. That's the problem here. So for those who are not familiar with the RDA, the BoF is a birds of a feather session. Basically, you have a topic that you are interested in and that you would like to pitch to the RDA community to start working on. And then the idea is, based on the discussions here, we would decide that we would start a interest group or a working group, which are the kind of forums that have regular sessions at the RDA plenaries and have some discussions between them. The working group has concrete outcomes that they're supposed to deliver. I think that is the main goal for our session today, or the pitch we want to make today, at least. So the rough agenda here is I'm going to start with a very short introduction. Then we're going to have an introduction with some examples of what we mean by mappings and in which context we're talking about them. And then we're going to have a series of lightning talks giving you a really good overview of people working with mappings in the RDA and outside of it. And then we're going to have a good amount of time for discussions. You can join the collaborative notes, and please do check in to the notes at the top, writing your name and your email address. So you can access it through the QR code here or just the session description on the RDA website. So you can navigate through the Whova app, click on the session, and then you will get into the notes as well. And this QR code will be back on the screen as we go into the discussions. The motivation for this session is basically that mappings are an essential component to, large-scale interoperability across different disparate systems. People do these mappings all the time to external systems and not necessarily sharing them. Creating a mapping takes a lot of time and effort, and it's kind of a wasted opportunity not to share these with the broader community. And there's no real kind of common practice or best practice on how to share these mappings so others would actually have a chance of finding them. There are some interest groups and working groups in the RDA already that have done some mappings and have found some way of distributing and sharing them across their communities. But the idea here is to think bigger and try to really start making this a good resource for the entire RDA community and beyond. Today we're going to discuss how to make mappings fair. We're also going to talk about different types of mappings, because we're not always using the same terms, and even within our small group preparing this session, there's a lot of terms that have different meanings depending on your background. And I think a working group could be a good forum to actually detangle some of the confusion and just find a way of agreeing on some useful terms that could help people share their mappings across communities and make them really reusable. That's the objectives of today. I also noticed this in the social media stream that just yesterday, Sarah Jones was caught saying that interoperability is a big challenge and that mappings between standards is a challenge and challenging and time-consuming task. And when we do it, we should really make sure that this is something that's useful to the wider community. We discussed some contexts where mappings are used as we prepare this session. And the illustrations on the right here, I'm not sure they really help that much, but in general, you might look at kind of large collections of systems trying to integrate or harmonize metadata coming from all of these resources to be used somewhere else for some other purpose. And then you could be just looking at a single file and perhaps in more detail trying to convert what I have here into what I need for a certain tool, or to integrate it with a certain software. So maybe that's more kind of a hands-on approach for a single scenario. And then you have the linked data kind of view of the world, where you might want to get these mappings as you browse through a graph to find a translation to a terminology that you can actually understand. And with that, I'm going to leave the word over to Jan, who will introduce the Fair Impact project.
Thank you, Walmar. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see that we have that many people in the room today. I just continue to show the interest on mappings and the fact it's a burning issue for many people. I'm going to give a very short presentation of the Fair Impact. That's the third time I'm doing that this week. So I guess many of you already heard about that, but I'll promise I'll make it quick. So Fair Impact is a European project. It's funded in the Horizon Europe framework, and basically it's a coordination and support action. So basically our job is to actually get in touch with the communities and engage with the communities to identify the existing practices around mappings and to start coming up with some consensual recommendations that we can share to all the different communities that we can co-create with the communities, right? So we started like June 2022, so we're almost midterm. And our objective in the task related to mapping is that we would like to establish guidelines on how to make mapping fair, because that will help actually setting up the scene to actually get some checklist on how to share properly your mappings. One of the objectives is to work with the communities to co-create, test, and adopt machine actionable common exchange model. We understand that communities already have set up their own systems with their own ways of dealing with mappings. We cannot ask them to actually change everything. So the idea is to try to see if we can agree on a common way of exchanging this information so that we make sure that things are interoperable. And in the meantime, we would like to identify the existing methodologies and practice on mappings, because we all have different views on how you do a mapping, how you maintain them over time as well. So that's also why we're interested in the governance aspect. So when we analyze the mappings, we are working on the two sides of the same coin, basically. One side is the technical analysis, which would be giving you feedbacks and recommendation on how technically making your mapping fair. The other aspect we're interested in is actually the practical aspect of how do you generate your mappings? Do you have a process in place? Do you do that through a hackathon and ask a student to do it? So that we can start evaluating the different ways of doing things. And then we would like them to merge them and make a sort of recommendation on what would be a good process for dealing with mappings for the life cycle of the mapping, right? And make a recommendation so that communities that haven't started the mapping process or do not have a process in place get a source of inspiration to actually get started with proper practices. So related to that community mapping practices, well, we have a workshop coming up on November 24th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. CET. So for Europeans, again, I apologize for the American colleagues. Next one, we're making sure that we are going to be a bit more inclusive. The idea there is that we will have community presentations, and the idea is that through discussions, we'll see if we can identify commonalities on the existing process. And you have the QR code here on the slide if you want to register, or you can go on the Fair Impact website. Related to the technique part, we already had a first workshop in April that was actually quite successful. You can find all the content. We have a small report. You have a YouTube video of the whole session. We had 120 participants, which was quite impressive. And we discussed 4 topics: what would be the specification to make fair mappings connected directly to the FAIR principles, the types of mappings, which is a very important issue that Walmar highlighted, just to make sure that we are talking about the same thing, and it's not always the case, so it leads to confusions. Sometimes, what are the existing tools for mapping and requirements, potential requirements for improving tools that exist, and also what are the mapping technologies. So through after that workshop, we collected inputs and we started to work on putting together recommendations. You have them there on the table. I'm not going to discuss them in details, otherwise I'm going to spend an hour. But this is preliminary work, and the idea is that we would like to get your input on that, where we will be releasing first version by the end of the year, and we're planning to organize a workshop beginning of next year, where the aim is to discuss this first version and start improving and moving to version 2. And now I leave the floor to Jonas, who's going to present Faircore for you.
Thank you. So I won't be presenting the project, but a small part of this Faircore for us project, which is the fair mapping repository that basically probably fits the best to the theme of the, which one is it? This one, yes. So what is in the metadata schema and crosswalk registry? That's the official name of the component. I'm going to refer it as an MSCR. The content, the registered content in that registry will consist of schemas, and there's a long list of schema formats. Some of them might be more traditional schema formats like the JSON schema and XML schema, but we are also considering SCOS vocabularies as a kind of schema, a shackle, which is a graph schema, so to speak, OWL, but also, but in the end, there's PDF, which is human readable schema format only, so to speak. The other primary content are the crosswalks. So crosswalks between those schemas. They can be, again, basically any kind of file or reference to a file. So XSLTs are an existing crosswalk types. There will be a crosswalk editor, which that you can use. It's a tool, visual tool that you can use to create crosswalks between those schemas, registered schemas, and it will be stored in internal format that is of no importance at the moment. What is important is that there also will be a support for emerging standards for crosswalks, like for example SESAM, but it can't handle, the SESAM in its current form can't handle all the mapping cases that we have. All the content that is registered will get a resolvable handle identifier, and the individual mappings, which are part of some crosswalk, will use part identifiers. And then there will also be an access to the crosswalk will be something that you can actually run either as using an endpoint as part of the service, or using a component that you can deploy in your own environment and run it there. And this is a kind of like overview picture of an MSCR in a nutshell. So you register schemas for sources and targets, and you use the crosswalk editor to create the crosswalks, the mappings between those schemas that will, and then you will register a new crosswalk based on that. And then there is this transformation engine where you can put in the source data, and using the crosswalk, it generates a target data. And this is probably related to the content of the session. So the kind of mappings that we will be supporting in the MSCR. So there are semantic mapping between, for example, ontological concepts related to different kind of identification of people, connecting elements in schemas like a temperature XML element to a vocabulary or an ontological concept, connecting, in this case, let's say it's a JSON property called hash string to a data type coming from a data type registry. That's the working DOI, actually, DUI, which points to a specific type of hash string. You have structural mappings going from one to many mappings, like in the coordinate case, or from many to one, as in the JSON case, and also value mapping. So this is part of the data transformation process. So we are going to be utilizing for example, the vocabulary mappings between strings. So when you're doing the data transformation, you can include that there, and from string to a vocabulary concept, for example, a structural changes in strings, like in the third example, and also unit conversions. So all of that will be in one way part of the MSCR mappings. Thank you. And then we are going to be switching to the lightning talks.
So to talk about mapping, we wanted to get an overview of what kind of mapping exists out there and what are the use case. So I would like to call the speakers to actually join me here so that we can go fast. Remind the rules, 4-minute stop, please, because we have 12 presentation. So first is Vim. If you want to know your order in the list, you can go to the collaborative notes and Walmart put the list together because we won't see the slide anymore. Vim, please. And the next to be prepared is Kurt.
Thanks, Jan. So very quickly, the Brokering Framework Working Group has been in existence for quite some time, and it more or less concluded its work in late 2020, but then due to co-chairs retiring and COVID and all kinds of other circumstances, the work has never been completed. So there's quite a bit of legacy material there that could be useful in a new working group context. And Tommy has agreed to assist with potentially wrapping up that working group, at least publish some kind of structured output, whether it's a recommendation or supplementary material. And then the bulk of the work that we've done there is, of course, available to take forward. Now, the Brokering Framework Working Group worked at potentially one level up from what we are discussing here today, because the kind of transformations that you are talking about here, whether they're semantic or schematic or structural, as Jonas calls it, or syntactic, the way that you address services and so on, those are examples of mediations. So they take output from one service or a source and transform, they mediate it so that it can serve as an input for some different process or application. So, and there are different flavors of this that we investigated in the Brokering Framework Working Group and classified and looked for sort of generic classifications of all these different transformations. But the working group was really more interested in what happens once you would have such a registry of all kinds of mappings and transformations, because brokering is actually quite important in that context. There are ideas such as arbitrating between two different pathways to get from A to B, because there might be more than one transformation service available to you. And we were thinking about the properties that such a registry would have to store so that users can make a decision about which of the two to use. And it could be cost related, it could be computational, intensity related, all kinds of factors involved there. The other thing that we have identified that I don't hear a lot of talk about, but I think is quite important, is whether a transformation is reversible or not. Because it's almost the equivalent of saying I have a lossy compression. If it's not lossy, you can, of course, register a mapping in one direction, but it will also work in the reverse direction. But if it's a one-to-many or there's some ambiguity about matching things exactly, of course, then it's not reversible. And that has implications for the kind of graph that emanates in this registry of all the different transformations that we have available. On the right-hand side, we have these additional things that we can do if we have such a registry. Example at the bottom right of what we call a minimum spanning tree. So this is basically something that says, these are the minimum transformations that we need to get from everywhere that we can start to everywhere that we can end. And it comes from the fact that you have a graph-like structure with attributes associated with the links between the nodes that you can utilize. So I'm going to stop there. There's a lot of information, of course, in the link there that you can go and have a look at. We looked at a large number of use cases, but as I say, it's time to wrap up that work and to give it to any interested party that might want to take it forward. Thank you.
So, good morning, everybody. Let me give some background information on what Switch is. Switch is the National Research Education Network in Switzerland. We are providing services, a research network identity management and security, and in context of the open research data strategy in Switzerland, we introduced the Connectum project. The Connectum project is, the aim of that is that we would like to offer a knowledge graph. We would like to offer some fair aspects so that the people has a better understanding about that. So, yes, that's not me.
So that's the big green button.
This one. I'm sorry. Shall I go back? Okay. Yes, so the use case itself, it's, you see the open data providers. We are collecting metadata from the OAA through different kind of protocols, APIs, or have simply dumps, CSV dumps, and we get different kind of quality of metadata. This different kind of quality of metadata needs at the end some pre-processing approaches. Pre-processing means author name disambiguation, means URL sanitation, and all this kind of stuff has to be clarified first before we can start the transformation. The transformation includes the mapping process and also the validation process, and finally the data enrichment process. And Tobias Schweitzer explained this morning in the session a little bit more deeper what means the data enrichment. We can come back to in the discussion about that. Finally, the validated approach comes up, will be done through the presentation of our REST ontology in schema.org we did. And if the data are validated successfully, we had at the end a metadata graph. This metadata graph would be available by service providers. In this case, that they can use REST APIs for export data from the knowledge graph and to present them to their own organizations, or to enrich this metadata, which is in the knowledge graph. So you see the symbol of EOSC. So that means for us, and this is a strong requirement, that you should be aligned to what the EOSC organization is doing on the research infrastructure, so that we can integrate all this stuff. So what is then the process behind and the mapping? What I have teased a little bit. So you see on your left-hand side, the import, or I would say the OpenAlex example as an import source. This OpenAlex example as an import source comes through the transformation. The transformation is based on RML, and this RML part will be explained, give you the chance to visualize this at the end in a turtle version, where you have the triples explained here and showed on schema.org. So what means then the transformation process itself? RML, you know, has a different kind of RML engines. We have the RML mapper. It's more an academic one, or Carmel that we use. And we have different kind of presentations, so XPath, XML, and we are doing with this transformation at the end a move between the non-RDF to RDF data. Thank you very much.
Next is Alexandra Kokinaki, and the follow-up will be Javier Milana.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm Alexandra Kokinaki from the National Oceanography Center in the UK. And I will talk about unit conversions. And I'll start with the end in mind. This is what we've implemented. So we wanted to show measurements of different parameters from essential ocean variables for temperature, oxygen, nutrients, and pH in a color-coded map, all measured in a certain unit. So temperature in Celsius, oxygen in millimole per cubic meter, and nutrients in millimole per cubic meter, and pH, no unit conversions. So thankfully, all of our data sets were annotated with terms and semantic artifacts from the NERC vocabulary server. So we also had in mind that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to reuse what already exists and do whatever we need to deliver for unit conversions with the least effort. So we used mappings, and we used mappings to go from a parameter that is associated with a semantic mapping of has quantity kind. A certain parameter, for example, dissolved oxygen, is associated to many dimensions. A dimension is associated to many units with the SCOS narrower mapping, and a unit is also associated with QUDT units, which are the quantity, unit, dimension, and type organization that provides semantic specifications of units. Having the unit element of QUDT, we were able to jump into their sparkle endpoint and use federated sparkle queries from our sparkle endpoint to theirs and provide the unit conversions that we wanted. This is how a mapping looks like. So it shows that from a dimension, we have the narrow relationship to a unit of measure. And that was created in a certain date from a certain creator. And it also includes a mapping URL. And the status is valid. And we also have we have a unique identifier per mapping. And we encode that with the SESOM ontology. So this is how it looks in a machine-readable way. And finally, this is you can't see the query, but this is how the unit conversions came back to us. And then we gave them back. So to convert a certain unit into another unit, you have to multiply by something. And that is all coming back through federated Sparkle queries. So that's what we did. And I'm giving the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you, Alexandra. Next in line is Garen.
How do I go to the next slide?
The big green button.
The big green button. Yeah. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Javier Millán Acosta from Maastricht University, Department of Bioinformatics. And I'm going to be pitching an idea for some work that isn't done yet, which is adopting these Sesame mappings in the BridgeDB tool to make it fair. So BridgeDB is a framework for mapping identifiers from database to database. We deal with protein identifiers, metabolite identifiers, gene identifiers, conversion identifiers, etc. And the main way that BridgeDB is accessible is through the web surface. So with an API, making it platform and language independent, though there's multiple packages. And as I say here, it's a backbone for path vision, wiki pathways identifiers. So the idea now would be, the idea now would be to implement this Sesame format in the web service. So to the left hand, that's the current text MIME format that we provide. But the idea would be to implement Sesame to be able to deliver the format with with these fair mappings. That I am aware of, nobody else has implemented Sesame on API calls. So we were wondering what is the MIME format for Sesame. And this is a little bit what the mappings will look like, right? So you have subject ID, you know which is the source. And then this is just a mock table, but we have different mapping justifications. So this is a little bit what we want to implement.
So the next is going to be Isolt after Gerrit. Thank you, Gerrit.
I'm Gerrit Goldbeck from Goldbeck Consulting in the UK. What I'm going to report on is some of the things that we've been doing in a project called Onto Commons, mainly, also including Jan. This is about the bridge concept and mappings that we're also applying now in the area of chemistry and materials. There's also a poster if you want to look at that. In particular, just a brief thing I want to show here is we're reviewing materials in chemistry, terminology, and ontology. So that's basically our use case. There's no standard terminologies, poor coverage, inconsistent use of top level. So we really need to address how we can make sense of the different available semantic artifacts, such as few terminologies, some domain ontologies, and have a better bridging between the concept or mapping between whatever they have come up with their concepts. So the bridge concept approach is really a bit more pedestrian than what we've seen so far. It really starts with the point of having rich elucidations and annotations and support and guide semantic mappings. So it's a collaborative tool for domain and knowledge experts. So it is a template. You can probably don't see a lot of that. The detail is, but the sections are that there is a concept characterization based on an elucidation, labels, OWL type, ARI, and so on. The background knowledge domain resources that feed into that. And then for all of the target ontologies, there is a mapping, and that uses different type of semantic relations levels depending on what you can actually say about that mapping. We have used that and applied that to develop these for a number of the key terms in materials that are shown in that list. Also developed some taxonomies as a basis, and that's really the basis then that we can come up with. For example, in the project site, which is shown on here, you can actually get to the framework, and there are then sort of meta-OWL files that actually connect different ontologies into one system using that type of approach. Thank you.
Right. Next is Isolt, and after that we'll have Sveinung. So please get ready.
Thank you very much. So I am Isolt Lynch from the University of Birmingham, and you see all the people on here. So CoData, Inchi Trust, IUPAC, World Fair, Nanosolve and Nanocommons are the projects. And the reason that all of these people have been involved is that we've been spending a little while thinking about how we would extend the Inchi to nanomaterials. And as part of that, we have been thinking about how to describe and represent nanomaterials. And where the mapping comes in is that there are so many different ways to describe shape. So this is just some examples. I know you can't read it. The image shows that, we think about nanoparticles or nanomaterials. They have all sorts of different shapes. That's only a small subset of them. When we describe them in papers, we might describe size as less than 100 nanometers, or 90% is below 20, size between this and this. Sometimes people just describe shape very simply based on it's spherical, it's irregular, it's a wire, it's a triangle. But again, they're very vague, and they also don't capture the fact that there's usually a distribution. But also then we have complex things like you might have, a mixture with defects and interfaces and all sorts. So many, many different ways, even to describe something as simple as size and overall shape, never mind when we get into crystal structure. So again, what we're trying to do now is to sort of think about how we might pull together all of these different ways of representing the shape of, so that the morphology and shape of a particle, but also the crystal structure. So here, for example, we have in the images on the right, there's the FCC, a face cubic center crystal, or the HCP crystal shapes, or there's work done that defines it based on the thermodynamic controls of a crystal or the kinetic controls of a crystal, and these wolf type structures. But then also the different space groups that are available. We also have a whole bunch of work that was done around using, for example, transmission electron microscopy images, and then pulling out a whole load of image type descriptors. So this is also I need help, so a call for help, because there are so many different ways to do it. And now I need help to sort of map some of these so that we can encode it into the Inchi, but also still have it vaguely understandable to the experimentalist so that they can sort of see where they fit as well. Because as an experimentalist myself, my cry always is, yes, but we need to understand it. So brilliant. Thank you very much. That's really all I had to say.
Thank you, results. Sveinung. Sveinung in the room? Well, it seems not, so that's one last presentation. So I will do the presentation for the next speaker who couldn't make it, unfortunately. Now, that will give the presentation for Nicola Matanzoglu, who is the lead developer of Sesam. Basically, the use case is to actually map rare disease concepts across resources, right? And the objective is to count across the resources how many rare disease they are. So basically, they looked at, it's a part of the Monarch initiative. They looked at different resources and started to count the number of disease there are in these different resources. They ended up having in 5 resources, finding 1,577 unique rare disease concepts. But then when you start looking at the cross-section between the 5 resources, you end up with 333 concepts that are actually overlapping, which means there's a lot of heterogeneity in the namings of things. So it becomes there important to actually do the mappings and investigate whether the terms are related or not and how they're related. So that's why they're using, well, Sesam, because they develop it for this kind of purpose, where they start doing matches between the names of the disease in the different resources that exist. So I hope I didn't miss anything, and I'll see if Nico just gives me after the session. Then now I think we're moving to the remote participants. And now I think it's time for Rory.
Hi, yes. So I'm Rory Edmonds. I'm the Samples Community Manager at DataCite, and I'll be talking about the crosswork recommendation that came out of the partnership between IGSN and DataCite. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little context of the IGSN DataCite partnership. So the IGSN was the International Geosample Number, now the International Generic Sample Number. And the organization behind the IGSN a couple of years ago came to a bit of a crossroads in their existence, where they basically were looking at their sort of future growth and sustainability. So first of all, and I'd forgotten to say this, the International Generic Sample Number, IGSN ID, is a globally unique and persistent identifier for all material samples from all disciplines. So once they'd reached this crossroad, the IGSN organization basically decided they needed to look for a partner in the space, and they approached DataCite. And in October 2021, we created a partnership whereby DataCite provides the IGSN registration services to ensure ongoing sustainability, while the IGSN organization implements, promotes standard methods for identifying, citing, locating material samples with confidence. The first phase of this partnership was really a technical transition. So that was bringing the technology stack that already existed and the membership that already existed under IGSN beneath DataCite. And that was finished a few months ago. But one of the big components of that was really forming a working group to develop a consensus crosswalk between the existing IGSN metadata and DataCite schema version 4.4. So if you go to the next slide, please. So how did we go about that? Well, first of all, we obviously focused on the fact that there are 6 mandatory DataCite elements: identifier, creator, title, publisher, publication, year, resource type, and 6 recommended DataCite elements: subject, contributor, date, related identifier, description, geolocation. So we worked really on the mandatory ones first, moved on to the recommended ones, trying as best we could to work out where the similarities were, where the disparities were, what sort of we could fudge versus what was a major gap. And one of the major challenge with all this really was that we couldn't just use the IGSN registration metadata, which is the standardized metadata that everybody was using. We also had to reference their descriptive metadata, but that would never been universally approved across all of the IGSN allocating agents. So it was really quite inconsistent and meant we needed some working out with each individual allocating agent. But we really sort of had two layers to this. One, bringing everything that already existed beneath DataCite, but also then how do we in the future register IGSN IDs for, especially in this case, geo samples. We're also working with other communities now in communities of practice to think about how that works for other disciplines. But this exercise was really about the geo samples that came from historically the IGSN. And there's a few examples there of some of the things we've done. And the title and resource type general, they give you examples there of places where there were things that were required by the DataCite schema that didn't really exist in the IGSN metadata schema. So there was no real idea of a title, but it's vital for DataCite metadata as regards discoverability. Obviously, we want to think about things in terms of different resource types and how we deal with them. So we made sure that all IGSN IDs have the resource type general physical object. And we also want to further classify that down into a minimum of a material sample, or what we call a feature of interest, which is basically the sample site. And then the other two there are examples of where there was a situation where there was kind of a many-to-one relationship. So IGSN, the registration metadata, had a particular field talking about logging date events. That actually maps to several different places within the DataCite metadata schema. And then we have alternate identifier, related identifier, noting alternate identifier is an optional property, but we included it sort of within our recommended. There's a lot of different things going on. You know, there are several places where you need to put the local identifier as an alternate identifier, several places where you have to capture relationships. I haven't got time to go into the details, but I'm happy to talk more in the discussion if we want to go into those details.
Thank you, Rory. So thank you very much for the presentation, Rory. Can you hear me? I don't know which mic is working.
Yes, I can hear you. No problem.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Next in line is Keith. Keith, are you online?
Great. Yeah, I'm here. Thanks very much, Jan.
Sure.
So I'm going to talk about metadata mappings, crosswalks, and conversion. I'm from Metadata Interest Group, and my co-chairs are listed there, Rebecca and Alex. Next slide, please. So to match, map, and crosswalk or convert, you need various things. You need metadata element matching, you need mapping, and you need conversion. And here's the big warning: watch out for the combinatorial explosion. Basically, if you try to relate everything to everything, you get more or less n squared of mapping and converters, and that's completely impractical and intractable for any reasonable research project or research environment. If we relate every metadata standard that's relevant to just one superset rich metadata standard, we have only n mappings and converters, which of course becomes tractable and practicable. Next slide, please. So what Metadata Interest Group has been working on is a thing called the metadata element set, and the URL for it is at the bottom of the page. Each element has its own URL, and there you will find all the discussion and proposals that have been generated over the last about 7 years discussing the metadata element set that's suggested by RDA Metadata Interest Group as a target for any conversion of metadata to metadata. Next slide, please. So some take homes. There's much to be done, but some systems have actually been working for years. There's obviously, you have to do this metadata conversion if you want to interoperate digital assets. It's intellectually challenging, it's fun, and it really assists researchers and others. And I can say that statement because my first paper on metadata mapping and conversion is from 1976. So I've been in the business quite a long time. Finally, as a start, look at the mappings in the RDA Metadata Standards Catalog, which was developed by a working group under Metadata Interest Group. There are the URLs, and I recommend that's a good starting point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you very much, Keith. So the next is Andrea Manocci.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, next, please. I'm cheating here because I do have a couple of animations, but okay, so bear with me. So this presentation tries to report on our work in the working group on scientific knowledge graphs interoperability framework, and it pretty much resonates with the previous presentation. So as we know, science is a network, a complex network of ideas, research products, institutions, and people that are working together. And open science asks researchers to deposit metadata about all the products and possibly connect them, relate them with semantically, and connect them to entities that are present in academic registries and other platforms, for example, ORCID or CARTIS. And so this entails dissemination of metadata all around the web. Next, please. And this translates as well into a fair bunch of people, initiatives, platforms, and services that are trying to reconstruct the scientific track record nowadays. And is a merry bunch. We are a lot of them. I'm working within the Open Air Graph initiative. And I cooperate with others. And the best shot here is that, next, please, is that we basically establish point-to-point mappings and collaborations. And this entails to asymptotically to n-squared complexity. And next, please. The best would be to have a kind of federated system in place that enables to interoperate in a tractable and computationally feasible way. Next, please. So the idea in a nutshell is that we have different scholarly knowledge graphs out there, and we want to provide an interoperability layer that each alternative can decide to opt in. And this interoperability layer, whose implementation is on the shoulders of the scholarly knowledge graphs at hand, basically outlines a number of rules and guidelines, a common information model that we are deriving by analyzing and having onboarded spokesperson from different initiatives. We have DataCite, Open Citations, OpenAlex, and OpenAir inside that are participants to discussion, and so that everyone can map to this minimal model, and so that the information that's locally available can be potentially exchanged across the initiatives without reinventing the wheel day in, day out. You can read the documentation if you search for SKJ if on Google, or you can join the working group in RDA. You're more than welcome to participate in the discussion if you want. Yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and sorry, yeah, this is basically the model that, the model and the website.
The next is Milan, and Milan, I will ask you just to give to present the first use case you proposed, please. Milan?
Yes, I will be very short. Please, if you go on the next slide. First use case is based on how to map different type of dates from Dublin Core to DCAT to DataCite. And what we have seen that in Dublin Core we have and also in DCAT we have a general metadata element date. If we use date, then we don't have semantic meaning of different types of dates. So important is to add also other attributes, and in Dublin Core they edit issues, modified, accepted, etc. The same is in DCAT. In DataCite, they have vocabulary with date type, and also they have one additional metadata element for the description of with text date information. And another thing where is problem is that in every metadata we have problem with different types of values. For example, dates are possible to describe by strings or different type of dates, or maybe by year. But why this use case is important? Because similar problems we have with description, contributor, subject, etc. Please go to the next slide. And there is an example of mappings. And on the first mapping, you see that we need to translate this type of data accepted to this value, and also to this is translation from for example from Dublin Core to the DCAT, and there is a type, there is no type, there is only a data element. In a second case, we need to parse this string if we want to translate into these two values. On the second example, we have only year, and if we wish to translate into the map to this date, then we have also problem. We need to parse, for example, this string. Please, if you go on next slide, I will be very short. Important thing is how to convert geolocations, because maybe we will go to the last slide and I will show you where is problem. Problem is, if we have vocabulary, it is possible to use API and to transfer from this metadata schema, from these metadata elements to metadata elements in other schema. It is trivial. But if we have string, it is possible to have more than one place with the same geolocation, with different geolocation. And in this example, we need much more other information. It is not enough to have only string. This is all from me.
Thank you, Milan. Actually, congrats. You managed to actually show you two examples in less than 4 minutes. So I really appreciate that. And actually, I would like to thank all the speakers, because we put them in the really hard spot to explain things that can be very complicated in 4 minutes. So I really would like to thank you very much for keeping up with the time. Now, I see myself. Yes. Now it's discussion time. And that's why I'm really grateful for the speakers, because we have now 35 minutes for speaking time and discussions about mappings and about the future, right? So the aim of that series of lightning tone, beyond putting you into sleep, because there's a lot of presentation, a lot of information, is just to show that in many cases, and many people need mappings, basically, for different reasons and different kinds of mappings in different formats, and so on and so forth. And so at some point, if we really want to work with this mapping and use them to knit the information systems together, or even the data, we really need to actually converge on some common practices that will help actually sharing that this mapping, so people do not have to reinvent the wheel. Right. So the idea of this session is to start talking about Well, we have, for instance, groups in RDA, like the metadata interest group that's been working on mappings with their format. There's the scientific knowledge graph group that's working also on mappings between knowledge graphs. There are other working groups that we discussed with yesterday in the WISIC session that are going to talk about mappings, and Gerhard presented some of the concept, for instance. So basically, it's going to be a hot topic in RDA for many groups. And the idea would be now to make sure that we discuss together rather than work in silos, because at some point, well, if we just rebuild silos, we kill the point of the mappings, which is to break them. For fostering the discussion, we had the idea of starting with a short Slido. So Walmart, do you mind starting the Slido? Oh, sorry. Can you start the Slido? And I will have to apologize because I have to catch up a train at 1:15 at the train station. So I will have to run away in 20 minutes. But you're in good hands with Walmart and Eunice. So the first questions we wanted to ask, and you can join the Slido. So you go on slido.com or you use the QR code, and the code is 2553204. And the idea is to start investigating for what purpose you would use mappings. Oh, so you want to map the Slido. Hey, that's a good idea. Interesting. So the two first right now, it's interoperability, which is indeed, of course, the key point of doing mappings, but it's for data harmonization, metadata transformation, multilingual science, data integration. That's interesting. Translation, indexing. So as expected, basically, there are many different usage for the mappings. So one of the tasks we would foresee for a working group is to actually try to identify the different kinds of usage of mappings. Yesterday, I gave a short presentation of the work and discussions we had in the DAX2 workshop on mappings for data integration. Although we had the semantic part, actually, we had to drill down a little bit further because we wanted to also talk about what we called data mapping. So how you go from one data to another, like unit conversions and these kind of things, and how that interplays with the semantics and the ontologies. So one of the goal of the working group is to also try to collect as much as possible use cases and usages to look at the different practices as well that are associated with this. Maybe we can go to the next. I see that's still 3 participants typing. Now, the question is about the kind of entities you would map. Do you work at the level of concepts? Do you work at the level of data instance, like value of the numbers? What is the level of the mapping you're using? Do you do mappings between concepts of concepts between ontologies or metadata schemas? So one of the reasons we ask for that question is part of what we were saying. Actually, mapping is an overinflated concept, right? And depending on who you talk to and its perspective or its usage, actually, you may end up talking about 2 different things. And the point of identifying these different types of mappings is to clarify the language and make sure that we are all talking about the same thing. So one of the additional tasks we may have, or we are considering in that working group, and we already started in the Fair Impact project, is to actually bring people together to identify these different types of mapping and come up with a unique classification or terminology of this mapping. So we are sure that we're talking about the same thing. And that's important because we realized that there were some misunderstanding on mappings. So when you talk about ontology mapping, it's semantic alignment and it has different names. So we kind of all understand each other. But there are people working on the data transformation and they use the term mappings in different way. And sometimes you end up having weird conversations where people disagree, but in fact, because they are not talking about the same thing. All right, so maybe we can everything. That's challenging, but that goes against what Keith was saying. That's a combinatorial explosion if you start with everything. So maybe we can move to the next question. So if we are considering building a working group, and actually I hereby would like to commit to actually run such a working group, and we are definitively going to go and discuss with the RDA Tiger. I know that they have been very supportive for some of our colleagues that are running new working groups. So we're going to leverage the support that will help us a lot and reduce our burden. So that makes things easier to build this working group. If we have to give it a name, what name would it be? Babel. That's a nice one. The mappers. Yeah. Classic. Yeah. So again, I mean, one of the reasons I'm also accepting to take care of this working group is because we are doing exactly. I mean, some of the work we're doing in Fair Impact is going to be important for the overall community. So instead of having our work staying at European level, we'd like to actually share and extend that to the rest of the world. And RDA is actually the perfect platform for doing that. Rosetta. Oh, that's nice, Rosetta. I like it. Babelfish. Okay, why not? Transformers. Well, I think we may have to pay a fee for Transformer. Make mapping fair. Yeah. Okay, thank you for your creativity. And I think we can move to the next slide. Now, I already started hinting into outputs, but well, one of the things that I would like to ask you now is if you're interested to contribute to that working group and to be an active contributor, please go to the collaborative note and put your name and address so that I'll put you in a mailing list and we keep in touch during the creation process of that working group. Now, one of the interesting things is we'd like to know is what would be the compelling outputs for such group that would be actually things that would be useful for you, right? Because if we are generating outputs, it needs to be useful. A registry mapping, sure, demos. Cool. Best practice guidelines, nice. That's what we're trying to do in Fair Impact, so that's well aligned with needs. I see that this idea of step-by-step how to targeting non-technical user is a great idea. That's what we're trying to do. So if you're interested, come in on November 24th. And that's what we want to do. Authoritative MOUs between map entity. All right, interesting. A CDIF module. I know who wrote that. No? Oh, okay. One of the things that was actually very nice to see in the presentation is the number of people considering SESAM or triple SOM. I mean, that's one thing that we need to do. We need to build mappings on how to pronounce that acronym. Yeah, we need to ask him. I mean, he would tell you SESAM because that's what he told me. But I find triple SOM nice too. It's like so that's one of the recommendations we're doing in the fair impact for fair mappings is like use SESAM as much as you can because it's actually a very good model. Their metadata is quite complete. We actually tested it against sets of queries that we would use to actually find mappings, and it turns out that we don't need to add anything. So that's actually quite a nice model. So use it as much as possible. Of course, it is limited because it's for simple mappings, so that we'll have though to start working. And I think that's one of the challenges we can tackle in the group is start identifying what is called complex mapping. We had some hints during the presentation where basically speakers were talking about, and I think Rory was mentioning, well, there is a 1 to n problem here because there's one element here, and actually Milan as well. There's one element in that schema and three in that one. How do I link them? How do I represent that mapping? And so I think one of the idea would be to see if we extend SESAM or if we actually build another model, and there are certainly some that exist for that we can look into. I mean, I'm always kind of reluctant to try to extend something that works nicely for something simple. For me, it's like trying to put a square in a circle, and you just destroy the nature of what you're doing. So if SESAM is the perfect fit for simple mapping, let SESAM be. And maybe build something a bit more complicated, like a simple standard for complex mapping. So that's SSCOM, right? Which would be slightly different. I'm just curious, a show of hands, who would be interested in actively contributing to that working group? Nice. Thanks, guys. Well, don't worry. Put your email. I'm gonna get in touch. Okay, I think that's the last question, right, Walmar? So we still have some time to discuss. So is there any comments, question, or something that you would like to discuss in the audience? I think that's the time for you to actually speak. I've done my part. Pierluigi? Yeah.
Thanks. So yeah, I mean, mapping has, as we've heard, it's been around for a very long time, and I think one of the things that has always been missing is the governance model of it, right? So I put in the authoritative mappings because, again, if I'm building systems like data systems, and again in the UN world, I can't really give too much attention to an output of a research group that nobody knows, right? I need to know that standards community X and standards community Y endorse a certain mapping as truth, right? Of course, there's room for innovation around that, you know, and all of that, but I think that would be a strong success. And this, I put in that CDIF thing because that's exactly what that you're aiming at the level of the International Science Council, at the level of the UNESCO United Nations area. Where are the recognized mappings? Now, of course, around those, there can be new suggestions, innovations, better ways of doing it, right? But it's more a governance problem than a technical one. Technical, it's not hard, right?
Okay.
It's more a question of, is it worth it? We did this with some of the biodiversity folks. We set up a SESAM. We set up a SESAM file between Darwin Core and the mixed standard for biodiversity. And we got the executive board of TADWIG and the steering committee of the GSE to endorse it with a memorandum of understanding. Then people know that they can actually use it with some authority behind it. So I think that's just what I'm going to put in here. It's easy to just sort of spend all the time developing cool mappings. It's nice, right? But what's really the governance model? Where's the trust in that?
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Governance issue is the key. And also, I mean, these are things that are going to be changed over time, right? So you need to also make sure that there is an agreement on how it's maintained, how it evolves, how you manage versions, and the endorsement of these changes. So from UN, I discovered that you have correspondence tables that are actually authoritatively published, that you can actually maybe convert into SESAM. That's some exercise we try to do during the DAX tool. So that could actually help reducing the burden of getting all this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the processes now with several UN organizations is to get lots of their vocabularies and stuff, at least to SCOS, right? At least on the web, at least in some kind of linked open data, because those are, the agreements of the member states. If we could map across those and bridge that to science, then we're actually doing something quite cool. We can link in like some fairly well-established governmental data flows into scientific monitoring, and lots is possible. But again, it's so easy with RDA working groups to kind of make it a playground of great ideas, right? But nothing concrete comes out that somebody on the other side of the world can actually use outside of research data. And I'm always wary when, again, there is an N+1. We hear all the time we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we saw it like 4 or 5 times in the talks here, for good reason, of course, because practically you must. But when you're taking this up to an output of an RDA working group, we can't have yet another standard that is the meta standard over them all. There are existing ones.
So I was also thinking about mapping frameworks when mapping is really difficult to happen. So this is a mapping framework is iAdapt. So when you have 2 different parameters that can be really mapped because they're in different granularity levels, they have units inside, you don't want to put the units inside and all of that. Mapping frameworks like the iAdapt group can be extended to other areas like quality schemes, policies, and all of that, so that mapping can happen automatically rather than manually, semi-automatically endorsed by the expert. And I don't know where that fits in the mapping working group.
Well, I guess that's for the complex mapping part, right? For the simple, you don't need, but for complex mapping or complex entities like descriptions of variables and the context of the variable, that's necessary. So that's the kind of things we can discuss in the working group, right? So what are the different ways of representing the mappings? The idea is not, again, it's not reinventing the wheel, though we certainly will at some point reinvent things, is to build on things that exist to extend them, right? So definitively we should consider iAdapt. I didn't know it was called the mapping framework, to be honest with you, but now why not? So Tommy.
So in relation to the gentleman's comment here, there are now 2 ongoing projects, the Fair Impact and Fair Core for IOSC, which are resourced to concretely carry out work. So that actually gives this working group a unique opportunity to get stuff done, because we have the resources and we are working on developing the solution that Jonas presented, and Jan is working on the recommendations. So engage with us and use us, please.
Yeah, I back this up. So we do have time and resources. So we're therefore here. So use us, definitively. So Barbara and then Pierluigi, and then I'm going to have to run.
I just wanted to say that I see now already how this can somehow converge, because Keith talked about elements, and one of the elements could be verbal mapping. So we are not reinventing, so just saying that one element could be. I adopt as a broker. I always say about broker mapping framework. So.
Right. In response to the European initiative, so I'm a European researcher, but again, working in the UN context, we realize that lots of things built through European projects are inapproachable to the rest of the world, right? In a sense, it creates a digital colonial dynamic that, you have to use European infrastructures and norms, or need resourcing or education that these other stakeholders simply don't have. So with this, and again, World Fair is European resourced, but we're trying to work globally. I think a message to IOSC and others, let's think really simply and cleanly. These things should work without an overhead that prevents Global South participants from actually using it if we want to create global data spaces. Otherwise, we're stuck in a kind of European-centric or global North-centric approach. There are ways to do that. And again, part of those principles that we heard, keeping it very simple, making sure that there's globally managed standards and it's not controlled simply by a small group of people in Europe. It's very important for this.
Maybe my
Let me
opinion
just reply
is
to
that,
that. That's why we have the RDA group. So please bring us the contacts of UN to work in the working group and to join to the meetings and discuss and actually criticize our work. I think that's important because that's why we create the group. I don't want it to be a local initiative that no one will read. I mean, that's for me a use of time and money on the European side if no one uses it as the international level. So that's why we have this framework here at RDA, which is open, where we have discussions and that's international reach. So I think by the link we have with World Fair, the link we could have with you, for instance, bringing in also by the UN, UNESCO, and all the people working on data to actually evaluate what we're proposing so that we can make sure that we make it simple for them to reuse, that would be fantastic. That's currently the goal I have in mind for that working group.
Very short response to that. Keep in mind that in other regions, people are not resourced to do this. So unless you pay them, they don't have time out of their day to participate. It's not just a question of making it open and available. We have to be very clear about that. So I would recommend like gathering some resources, perhaps through EOSC, where you find other regions as implementation partners to test it and give you a report, to pay for somebody's time a week, 2 weeks, whatever, then you're actually doing it. When we talk about inclusion, it's not just opening a door, you have to make sure people can walk through it.
And then I will stop there. That's a great idea, but we have regulations that prevents us to do this kind of thing. So we need to, it's a good idea to think about a funding scheme to actually do that. Maybe through Fair Impact as what they call open call. I need to check whether or not they are actually regulations to just limit that to European partners, but I don't think so. So we can try to do that. It's only Europe. So we need to try to find another way. On that, I would like to thank you very much all. And again, I would like to thank all the speakers. I have to run. It was really great. So if you're interested, let's get in touch. Don't forget to put your name in the collaborative notes. I'm going to get in touch with you in about 2 weeks so we can start the discussions and then get in touch with the RDA Tiger so we can put together this working group. So thank you again. And now I leave the mediation to Volmar.
Yes, so we will continue the discussion, but Jan has kindly volunteered and has some time to commit to actually work with supporting the continued discussions towards a working group. So he will probably be the one reaching out to the people who have said, yes, I want to join the discussions in the notes. And I think you have very good points that we should really make an effort to make this an inclusive and find support wherever it is possible for more regions to be engaged in the working group. So it's in the spirit of the RDA. I saw a hand over and a mic in the back of the room, and then we also have a hand on Zoom that's next up.
Yes, hello. My name is Sveinung Gunnarsson. I unfortunately mistook a bit time and place here, so I was supposed to say a few words when you skipped me, which is fine. I guess my question, or sort of my take-home message for my slides is what I'm sort of lacking a bit is the context around this in terms of tooling. I mean, how do you actually get data, raw data, in whatever form it is, into a form where you can do the mapping? I mean, it's only sort of I don't know if focus is just sort of the mapping stage, but there is things that should happen before and also after that. And is that something that will be interesting as part of this working group, or is that outside of scope? Talking more data wrangling kind of issues, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's an open discussion that we will need to have. I mean, some of that we might be able to raise some voices here in the room today, but then after this, I think as part of laying the foundation for the working group, that will be part of the discussion. I mean, I am a data wrangler working with file formats and kind of getting stuff in that. So I think that, I mean, there will be people like you who are interested in this, and then it's up to the people who are willing to commit and narrow down a scope that would be suitable for a working group in order to make it productive. And then somewhere there, maybe it will kind of decide someone will make a decision on where to go. Then there was a comment on Zoom, I think, but after that, I will try to follow up with the order of hands that I've noticed. So Milan, please.
My opinion about mappings is I have a lot of experiences with harvesting metadata from different sources. They use different metadata schemas. And where is problem? Quality of metadata. And another problem is in some metadata schemas, you don't have enough information and it's not possible to transfer to different metadata schemas. We also try to do things to transfer into intermediate metadata schema, but also is problem you lose semantics if you have richer metadata schema. And I think the biggest problem is quality of metadata. We need to prepare our data stewards to prepare better metadata if we want, for example, to do this open science graph, etc.
Yeah, I think that there could be also some training components to this working group, and I mean having some well-defined ideas, it makes it also easier to start developing training materials if that's not part of the working group already. So I think these things tie together as well. I saw a hand at the back to the left there. And
hello, this is a question I had in these days. I was wondering, referring to the last example about geolocalization, where incomplete information can lead to the wrong geolocalization. I was wondering if there is a standard way to quantify the performance of maps. And I think this is one of the fundamental problems to guarantee interoperability of maps. Yeah, that's my question.
So I'm not aware, and that would be a question for the room, I guess, and something perhaps to also include in the notes somewhere so we carry it over to the discussions in the working group. I see, is this a response to the question? Then I leave my mic here.
Not so much, it's a continuation of that. I think I put in the Slido thing this idea of validation, right? So we can map till we're blue in the face, but at some stage we need to someone needs to validate that it worked, right? So I think having a measure, something simple, if it's geolocation, just making sure like an ocean coordinate isn't in the middle of, you know, a continent. There are ways to do that. We heard Shackle, we heard other sort of ways of content validation, and deploying a few of them. Again, we can't be exhaustive with the diversity likely to come here, but in principle, showing that if you're mapping, you must also validate at the same time. Otherwise, how can somebody trust your map?
Yeah, and I think that also kind of ties into some of the recommendations of topics to work on, including use cases and I mean, framing it with that. Did you also have a comment on this, perhaps?
Couple of responses. So first to you about the, I already forgot about what did you, yeah. Can you, what was the question that you had?
Yes, hi. So my question was how sort of the mapping aspect ties into the tooling around them and data wrangling and how you, and this is relevant to the validation question though.
So I wanted to pose a question whether brokering should be part of the group's scope. So because it goes kind of like beyond, it's part of the operationalization of those mappings, or are we going to focus on the mapping part and not the wrangling part, for example, or the metrics related to brokering? And then I wanted to comment on the latest thing. There are, like, when you have this, I think this should be part of there were suggestions about the kind of vocabulary or the lingo that should be shared when we talk about mappings. And I think one of the important part is that the kind of mappings, like you can have deterministic mappings or something that has been specified very clearly, or you can have these probabilistic type of mappings where you can have confidence, you can have confidence scores, or you can have review of the manually curated mappings. But there also to comment on the first thing that was mentioned about the authoritative mappings, I think you should also be able to, you shouldn't in the work or in the output, you shouldn't rule out the kind of more lower level or kind of like this, maybe not that, where the scope of the value or the users of those mappings might not be that, or the usage might not be that wide, because the context can affect, for example, the Milan's example about the dates. You can have exactly the same structural mappings, or perfect mapping, but in one context, the dates are in certain format in the input data, and in the second context is something else. The year moves around, for example, the month moves around. So this should be included.
Yeah, good comments. And I mean, we will be having discussions, I guess, at different technical levels and implementations. I see a hand online, and I've seen a hand before here on the left, but I don't remember who it was, and the hand is down. So while Keith responds now, please recover your hand strength, perhaps.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to make a word of warning. The further you go in the meta levels above the base metadata describing the digital asset, the more likely there is to be uncertainty and error. So stacking bridges and vocabularies and ontologies on top of the base metadata can lead to huge problems in mapping. That's it.
Thank you. I think it would be useful to include a lot of you people, at least for the initial discussions, even if you're not willing to commit to be part of the active working group, to give some feedback based on your experiences from the different interest groups and working groups that you represent. So I see someone with a mic in the back, and then I'm going to hand over the mic here in the front.
Two comments. One, if you come up with a complex SM and you change the third S to C, it's pronounced scum. I think that's a super bad idea. But more seriously, I think as usual with these things, there's this idea that the scope could be enormous, and that usually produces a failure scenario. I like the idea that there be a focus on terminology in the first place, because the cross-talking in this space is horrendous. I think very much there needs to be an understanding about the information models, because you can't map between anything to anything. That's again a hopeless task. I really liked what I saw in the registry work that was presented at Core for EOSC, because they say, here's some common expressions of schema, and that bounds the problem in a tractable way. So I think that's an important discussion. But probably the biggest output from my perspective, and I'm looking at it from CDIF, is having a typology of mappings, is being able to say, this is this kind of mapping, and then a format like SESM to exchange that and make it available. I think those are really important things for the focus here.
Great. So this will be the last comment, I think, from the front.
Okay, I'm always practical. So you referred before to the brokering framework. So GeoDAB is a broker and already can map between different models. For example, ISO 139 to ISO 19115, and they already have them, but not listed or not published. So we could already be looking at practical examples of what already exists and what already people are doing to actually start utilizing them.
So thanks a lot. We're 2 minutes to time, I think. And I just want to say that, I mean, even though the initiative here and the presentation of the BoF, all European people were involved, we have been looking outside, but it would be great to find potential venues for resourced contributors to these venues. And we do have the tab for the RDA that will be reviewing the case statement for a potential working group, looking into also including disciplinary and the regional aspects in this. But we don't have resources to distribute. So that is something that would be a wide call to the community to try to help to address, and perhaps also within EOSC and the European context, we could see if could be funding like for the World Fair project, where they have included external partners as well. And I think that same line of reasoning could go for the more well-resourced projects in other parts of the world as well. So please do volunteer to contribute either to being an active member of the working group or just helping out, fleshing out a good case statement for this group. And then we will be reviewing the session. It's online, so trying to digest all of the comments and making something good from it. And I think it's going to be Jan that makes the email, distributes that, and invites people to the further discussions. So thanks a lot. And I guess it's time for either lunch or, yeah, it's lunch, right? Thank you.